First of all, Christophe, I'd like to thank you for accepting our invitation to speak in the Challenging Convention Speaker Series and for an inspiring and stimulating session today. I know that you're currently working on a book entitled Human Diversity in International Law and Beyond. Could you please briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about this project?
Yeah, I am in the final stages of this drafting project, of this book project. I hope I will be able to finish the book by the end of this year. And the topic is about elaborating and implementing principles, new principles aimed at protecting and promoting the diversity of human expressions in combination with peace. Peace understood as the absence of conflict. Now, the concept of human diversity is rather new. It is inspired by a quote from Hannah Arendt. It is inspired also by an existing international treaty, the 2005 UNESCO Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. So my previous work, my research for my PhD was on cultural diversity as a non-trade concern in relation to international trade regulations, at the example of the film industry. So I analyzed ways to deal with concerns related to the diversity of cultural expressions vis-a-vis GATS, the TRIPS. And now in this second book I try to adopt a more holistic approach using certain concepts, certain legal definitions to further elaborate them into these principles on diversity and peace. Now the idea is to use a process on the whale of ignorance on group affiliation to develop these principles. VIGA, veil of ignorance on group affiliations, which shall allow individuals to create new law in a situation, the original position, in which they do not know to which human groups they belong to. So you don't know, you are in this theoretical position, you don't know whether you are black or white, whether you are left or right, whether you are rich or poor, whether you are Muslim or Christian or Hindu, and so on. You don't know anything about your different affiliations to human groups, and human group being defined in a broad sense. And in this situation, I suggest that you will be inclined to come to principles that comply with a kind of new cosmopolitan law, a law of the weakest. Since you don't know whether you will belong in reality eventually to the dominant group, you will most likely elaborate principles that are in the interest of the weakest group. And in a second stage, back to reality, you go and compare what you elaborated in the original position with the law you elaborate or you comply with in reality, in the historic position. And this is the so-called coherence test. And either the original position and the historic position are the same, then you are very coherent, or it is not the same, and then you have a coherence gap.
I also know that a couple of years ago you completed a study on the implementation of the 2005 UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions for the European Parliament. Can you tell us briefly about this project?
Yeah, besides my research on cultural genocide and human diversity in international law and beyond, I'm also a lawyer located in Geneva, and as such I recently worked on a study commissioned by the European Parliament on the implementation of the 2005 UNESCO Convention on Cultural Diversity. And you will find this study and the documentation that goes along with it, and also audiovisual materials on the website diversitystudy.eu. And this study was allowed me and my research team to also test certain theories and certain approaches with respect to the implementation of this new piece of international legislation with stakeholders from various countries and regions in the world. We send a questionnaire to stakeholders in Latin America, in Africa, Asia, China in this case, and to assess the status of implementation and the challenges ahead to bring life to this convention, which is, although binding, it has many parties, is nevertheless a treaty that qualifies as soft law because it has a lot of vague concepts and definitions of the terms used are subject to interpretation, and the weakness is that the dispute settlement system is very, very soft. So presumably there won't be a lot of case law clarifying these open concepts in the near future. So the challenge is to find other ways to implement such a treaty.
And my final question, my final question is about your experience as a filmmaker. How does it relate, if at all, to your legal practice?
So as a lawyer, I have film directors, producers, film composers as clients, and I specialize in copyright law and in commercial law contracts, and film is about contracts. And as a researcher, I address the question of diversity, cultural diversity, taking the example of the film industry. And here my main point of investigation is the role of, among other things, the role of copyright with respect to the dissemination of films. Now the problem currently is that there are certain movies, and the same applies to books and music, that are well advertised. That means that they enjoy high marketing budgets. Say a US blockbuster from Hollywood typically costs 40 million to make and 60 million to sell. So 40-60 is the ratio. Like in the pharmaceuticals, a drug costs in research and development 40%, according to Canadian researchers, results, and 60 to sell. And the whole thing, the 100%, are protected by intellectual property, patent for drugs, copyright for films, book and music. And now if you have a film, a book, or music, or another cultural expression that does not enjoy competitive investments in marketing, nobody will see it, because the market is structured in a way that the loudest will get most attraction, most audience attraction. So you can do a film with high potential of public appeal, audience appeal, but eventually nobody will see it because you don't have the 60 million to sell it on a worldwide basis or on a local basis, whatever is competitive marketing. And now the thing is that this is not in line with the rationale of copyright protection. And the idea to address this issue is to introduce a new concept, the concept of variable geometry in copyright duration. So the longer, the higher the investments in marketing, cultural goods and services, the shorter the terms of protection. And the lower the investments in marketing, the longer the terms of protection. So the little fishes, the creative people who have great contents but no money for marketing will enjoy the traditional lengths of protection for their work, and the big studios will have shorter terms, and that will of course give a clear sign to investors to think twice. Ideally, in the best case scenario, the money will invest it in more diversified cultural goods and services because the terms are longer and the risks are lower to recoup the investment. And so you level the playing field between filmmakers, books, writers, music, composers, based on content and the choice of consumers and the audience, rather than the choice of corporate apparatchiks deciding what the consumer has to consume. That's the idea, and that was, by the way, also introduced as a recommendation in the study for the European Parliament of 2010. And for the details, again, diversitystudy.eu. The report is online, and comments, critical comments, can be downloaded.
Thank you, Christophe, and thanks again for coming to Canada to share your research with us.
Thank you, Igor. It was a great pleasure. Discovered a lot of new things, and it was wonderful to be with you and your team and the students here.